Hello. I'm Tom Geismar. This is Ivan Chermayeff, and this is Sagi Haviv, who loves to say, I wasn't even conceived yet when all that happened. We're going to do a little tag team here to try to go through a number of projects, because it was sort of interesting listening to Chip's presentation, especially the book jackets, because in essence, in designing graphic identities, we're doing somewhat of the same thing of trying to find what is the essence of this client of ours and what can we do to express that. The difference, I guess, in a sense, is that we very much take pride in trying to do something that we know can endure for a long time. And to do that, you need to avoid the most fashionable styles and other things that are au courant in order to do it. So we thought it might be interesting today to show you, I don't know what it is, 10 or 12 different projects. Some will do very short, some a little longer, but to explain our thinking behind them, because while styles have changed, while technology has certainly changed, and while we're all bombarded these days with visual images, our basic approach to developing graphic identities has really not changed from the beginning. And so we're going to show you examples that are very old and some that are very, very recent. But I think you'll see, even though they look very different, that the approach is very similar. So we're just going to sort of take turns doing this, and Ivan, you're up.
It's a lot of stuff that we've done. You'll as Tom says, see a few. We've done somewhere from 350 to 450 different logos and symbols over the last 5 decades plus, and they do endure. Most of them, things like Pan Am died because of one reason or another, probably the price of gasoline being one of them. But the next thing you know is they've reemerged now, screwing up our original logotype slightly, but nobody remembers it. They just remember the name Pan Am. But we've tried very hard to take a long-term view of what we do and keep it so that it will last a long time. And who knows what a long time is. And sometimes it's like Pan Am, it's about 15 years and then comes back, and other times it's been there for much longer. Mobile, as Tom is going to show you later, employed us for 38 years, which is a very long time. We actually went through 4 chairmen and didn't get fired along the way, which chairmen usually do, is clear the decks. So we're going to show you some of how these things came into being and how they worked. And a while back, we started with doing something for Showtime Networks, and Showtime for a big network is an extremely boring, stupid name, really. And the whole problem became one of how do you make that memorable enough to hold up in color and in black and white and in a second position to whatever they were promoting at any given time in mostly daily newspapers all across the country. So we made this logotype by trying to figure out what you could do with Showtime, and we found the idea of bringing the spotlight from theater into it and putting it onto show And that was very helpful because all the networks in the newspapers use these three-letter initials, ABC and NBC and so on. And we could do that. And the wonderful thing about putting the spotlight on show was the right-hand side of the O is still there, even though it's just the space that's between that circle of the spotlight and the W, and it's hardly noticeable. That's what's happened. And show without the W is still show, which was another little miracle that we got away with, and it's lasted for quite a few years. When we made very complicated guidelines, which for on-air and for print, as one has to do with these kind of things. But it worked out very well. And show was very, very good, and that small acronym could really work on the screen as just show. That works out, and that little show is especially good if you happen to have a zebra in your employee as well. Then another strange thing happened. Gray advertising. Gray is at the time we undertook it, when Ed Meyer was in charge of it, was the 10th largest agency in the world, and had an awful lot of people. And they had come up with this name Gray, a guy called Leibowitz, and Fat. And Fat and Leibowitz was not going to work very well as the name of an agency. So these two guys in New York said, let's call it Gray. And we were then asked to do something about it. And we just decided that neutral gray was the one thing that you couldn't do, and it was the one obvious thing to do, was to make gray gray. But to make gray vermilion really was a big, simple thing to do. And the chairman of the company was delighted, but also scared silly by it. And so instead of giving the presentation himself, he asked us to give it to his 100 art directors that turned up to see what their identity was going to be. And it got a sort of major standing ovation from them, and has been in place ever since, and makes Ed Meyer, who's now retired from the chairmanship, but every time he brings it up, and he says, how could you make gray orange or vermilion? And then he knows that he's in, like Flynn. And it's they're all over the world with offices everywhere. So that worked out very well. Tom, you're going to take over aquariums.
Yep. Let me have the clicker. One thing about Gray, just one other thing, we ran into Ed Meyer a couple of months ago in another project, and he told us that whenever they have a new client, one of the first things they do is show them the logo being in red, just to say that they are creative, they can think outside the box, and so on. And they've used it for years, apparently, that way. Aquariums. Aquariums are among the most popular public attractions in the world, and we've been involved with a lot of them. The reason is that Ivan's brother, Peter, is an architect who specializes in designing aquariums. Almost all aquariums obviously deal with fish and with water. So the problem with trying to develop an identity for the designer is, how do you make them different? How do you make them distinctive? And the more we got into it, we realized, for example, first of all, or mainly, that Peter always had a very clear concept for what each aquarium was. And some of them are very different one from the other. And so going by the concept of what that aquarium was, we were able to play on that and bring out some of the essence of what was trying to be done in that particular place. And therefore, it's sort of an endless bunch of marks that could be done, even though they all basically deal with fish and with water. The first one that we were all involved with was the New England Aquarium in Boston. And this goes back to the 1960s, and was really one of the first modern aquariums. It was also a very modern building, and this simple fish with on the blue field with the striping suggesting water was really to say this is an aquarium. This is where you'll find fish. And the aquarium itself was a very general kind of aquarium. Since that time, it's grown greatly. And inside, we did things like this neon wave and other kinds of things. We've always been involved in many of these projects, quite a bit beyond just the identity of them. The next one was in Baltimore, Maryland, the National Aquarium there. Now this was different. This one was to focus on water as well as fish, because the whole environmental concerns were then coming to the forefront. And so it was kind of an equal thing within the exhibits about water and about fish. So we came up with this kind of figure ground thing, which can be fish or can be water. I mean, waves or fish, if you will, which could be used in many different ways. This was a pattern, for example, that was used in the construction fence around the whole site, and so on, where they fit together like wallpaper. And inside, this is just in the last couple of years, a big expansion was done, and these are murals that read as one kind of animal as you come into the aquarium. This is in the main lobby, and as completely different because of their corrugated form as you leave. The next one they did was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And this one was quite different because it actually was based on freshwater fish. It's the sea life and the animal life around the Tennessee Valley, the Tennessee River, and all the tributaries in Tennessee. Tennessee has more species of fish than almost any other place, certainly in the country. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but this is the building. It has a huge terrarium on top, and so on. You can see the symbol on the side of the building. And here again, we got involved very much in the interior. The ceiling, for example, is almost like water when you're in these public spaces, and lights are continually going through those light bands in a wave pattern. And on the end walls, which go up the 3 stories there, they're completely typographic murals in kind of fish form, made of the names of all the fish, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them in this area and in the aquarium. After that, Peter designed a huge aquarium in Osaka, Japan. And this aquarium, I'm not sure, I'm not really touching this.
Pressing
Huh?
on the keyboard.
Oh, kissing keyboard, sorry. Again, it's a very large building. And one thing about aquariums generally is they have a lot of blank walls. There are a lot of big walls because you're trying to make it dark inside for the fish environments. So in this case, did all these murals around thing out of tile. But just to go back 1 second to the logo, this aquarium was based on what's called it was called the Ring of Fire Aquarium, because it's the tectonic plates that surround the Pacific Ocean and the sea life and the animal life that is around that so-called Ring of Fire. So obviously this is a visual interpretation of that idea of Ring of Fire around the Pacific Ocean. And these murals were made of brightly colored tiles, that formed in a very pixelated way the fish life and so on in a very decorative way. And then finally in the aquariums, one in Lisbon, Portugal, done for the big expo there. And here we simply, this again was more generic in terms of what it was about. So basically it's fish and the eyes doubling as bubbles in the water, if you will. And in this case, same situation where huge walls. So we took classic Portuguese tile patterns. These blue tiles are very famous in Portugal, and analyzed them according to 10 grades of darkness, and then made murals, again, huge murals on these buildings, basically based on very pixelated photos, black and white photos of these various animals, and there are a number of these around, and they're quite huge. And they read very clearly from a distance. As you get up to them, you see the decorative pattern of the tiles. But all of this, you know, it was a lesson in that a really good client who really has an idea of what they're trying to do and everything makes a huge difference in what we as designers are able to do.
So on that subject of a really great client, you know, some of them are family members, which are easier to start off with. But with the guys from Armani Exchange who came to us in 2008 with a big problem, we had to kind of win their favor because they looked at us and, you know, we are, you know, a firm that started in 1957, and they thought, we could really see it in their eyes. Can these guys really help us? We're this young, sexy brand. So their problem was that the letters A and X that gained a lot of recognition were never really conceived as a logo, but they became famous. And you know, they realized that they have something here, but they had a really hard time using it. With the name, it made this awkward kind of shape. And on their ads, they either disappeared, like on the left, you just couldn't see it no matter how big you used it, or of late they had tried to put it in a square, but then it's really demanding. So what do you do? And they really did not know what could be done. And they said, you know, we give you a free hand, do whatever you want, reinvent the entire mark if you want, which we immediately realized that doesn't make sense because everybody knew AX. So what do you do? How do you create a bold mark while keeping it elegant, which was a very difficult task. We looked at it in the eyes of the designers, and we found the letter forms to be really kind of awkward, with some serifs being rounded and some straight, and that the two, we said to ourselves, wow, those two diagonals, wouldn't it be nice if they were parallel? But you really can't do that very easily, because you either get too narrow of an A or too wide of an X. Actually, the other way. Because these two diagonals are not meant to be parallel, really. So what we did first to fix the type, we went back to the Giorgio Armani family and saw that basically it was based on a French typeface named Dido, which is used a lot in the fashion industry. And we thought, what if we took this mark and just redraw it so that there's more contrast between the thicks and the thins, so it makes it a little bit more memorable. And also, we managed to make those two parallel, or at least appear parallel, so that the bold, so that the letters look like they belong together. They belong with each other. But then there's still the issue of the mark being really light. So while playing with it, all of a sudden we stumbled on something and said, wow, what if we reverse them out of two rectangles, and then the space between them just becomes this slash, and that's it. So the mark is still kind of elegant because the typeface still has those thick and thins, but now it's a bold mark. And when we presented it to them in applications, showing them how before they had no visual impact and all of a sudden they do, You can do all kinds of things with it. For a fashion brand, it's really great that you can have different seasons, different campaigns, all kinds of different renderings. And most importantly, in the magazines, it worked really, really well. Now you could see in the ads the logo. And then they were sold, and then they kept coming back to us for all kinds of things. They also are using it really large, which we thought, wow, we give you a bold logo, you can make it really small, but they kind of like that. Using it huge on billboards. These are just snapshots we took in New York City, and there's also the idea of, you can make dog tags. This brand was inspired by the Italian military. And then a couple years later, they were celebrating 20 years, and they came back to us and said, can you design an icon for us for a 20-year anniversary? And again, it was a little discovery of what if we just multiply the X, and then, again, that came to them not really prepared, so they decided, okay, now we're going to just switch it, and they switched for an entire year to this mark because it still embodies, it still has embedded in it the original mark, so they changed everything to AXX for a year. We even showed it on a piece of chocolate, which is kind of cool. And so that's a relationship that we built. It's a lot of fun to work on.
So at Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, which is called MoCA, we found that as a contemporary art museum, it really uses the basic elements of form, the square, the circle, and the triangle, with a sense of history thrown in for the the most modern part we made have age to it, and then found right away that there was no museum of contemporary art because they were in a temporary building while Isosaki built a museum for them, which of course took 2 years. So we named it, which they adopted immediately, the Temporary Contemporary, and just wrote this little T and added it to the logo, and that's what it was for that period of time, and until it became the MoCA again, and then we attached it to all kinds of folders and flyers and announcements and invitations for exhibitions, and that played fast and loose with this circle and the square and the triangle. And it, Richard Kashalik, who was the director, was very great and supportive about the whole project, and it was sort of never-ending until, of course, Richard Kashalik moved on. And one of the wonderful things that we've had the good fortune to do over the years is to have some loyal friends and amongst our clients. And Kashalik became the director of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C. And once again, we had the search to what you can do with a word like Hirshhorn, which is, except to notice that it's probably the only word in the English language that has 3 H's in it. So we said, okay, let's do it. And so this became, in several alternative versions, but this one was what prevailed, and Koshalik loved it. And we had these 3 H's, which makes this name, which was continuously misspelled by people leaving out one of those H's, that second one in the middle. And it's worked out extremely well. And Koshalik really wanted to play up the idea of having their communications. They have a quarterly magazine. They have posters on the Independence Avenue in Washington, outside this circular building, which no one really knows what the hell is in it because the signage is terrible. It was something that we also had something to do with because it was designed by Gordon Bunshaft, who was the creative director of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, the architects. But the building itself, interestingly enough, is just a side anecdote, which I can't demonstrate to you, but it's a circular building with a circular atrium, which is not concentric in the middle of the building. And it not being concentric cost the Hirshhorn $4 million additionally to build, which has got them rankled all of these years because they're constantly in need of funds, like all museums. But they wanted to, Koshalik very much wanted to have the Hirshhorn noticed in the mailboxes and on poster stands around the museum, which has no other signage, and have it as bright and colorful as possible. So we developed these variations on the H's of Hirshhorn for the covers of the magazine and on other material which they have to put out for their visitors, which are a number being on the mall over 1 million a year. It's a very visited place. Asked us if we would design a 9 for this building that was under construction after Gordon Bunshaft again called Sheldon Sullivan and said that he ought to talk to us. And then when he said that he had recommended this, I got another call from Bunshaft about 10 minutes later saying, by the way, I want to tell you that this son of a bitch owes me $300,000, and if I were you, I wouldn't work for him. But armed with that, we've been friends with Solo for at least 20 years now. We've got to get back to where we are. We made first the 9 sitting on the sidewalk right in everybody's way. It's 10 feet high, weighs a ton. It has a steel support that runs underneath it through 3 floors of garage, which is not a cheap thing to do. And that 9 has to be repainted all the time because being in city property, for which Solo pays rent to the city of New York for the space underneath the 9, women scratch it with their diamond rings as they walk by out of irritation of the fact that it's in their path, and it has to be repainted every few months, and that's been going on for 11 years. But it's such a famous landmark that when he decided to have a restaurant in the basement of the building, he decided to call it 8½. So We made a logo for 8.5, which is then on the door of this brasserie going in. But it's very nice that a logo would actually give birth to the name of a restaurant. So that was something for us to hold on to with some enjoyment.
Thanks.
We mentioned before about mobile, and Ivan mentioned some 38 years or whatever it is. It's sort of cloudy at this point, but for a long time. But I thought it might be helpful. I mean, all these things are different problems, they're different issues, they're different clients. The ones we've been showing you are ones where we felt a client really understood what we could possibly do and was very helpful, and especially in something like mobile, which is a huge corporation. The chairman, Raleigh Warner Jr., was the one who really got us involved and instituted procedures and so on that let this happen for all those years. But just to give you a little background of that, Mobile was not the company name even. Mobile was a product, but they had gone through many logos and many names over the years. When we first got involved, it was the Saucony Vacuum Oil Company, actually. Mobile was a product name. But the one thing that was common was sort of the blue and a little red and so on. And in 1955, as you see on the right there, they hired a very good designer to come up with a corporate identity program, and they did. They had manuals and so on. But it wasn't really implemented in a way that the company really meant it. And the result was they were all over the place, and especially as far as the stations go. This followed what was in the 1955 manual with these blue, the wrapped tires. This was really typical with the banners flying. Note the spelling of the name on the sign there. Not sure how that ever happened. The pumps, I mean, you know, there's a Mobile logo on everything. Every pump has it at least twice. I mean, it's just all over the place. And what was interesting is that what was happening at this time was this great flight to the suburbs, building of highways. You know, every house would have a garage. Everyone had to have a car. The car industry was really thriving. And Mobile was smart enough to realize that they were being, as most of the oil companies were, unwelcome tenants, if you will, in these new communities who wanted to have zoning laws and so on, and felt that these stations with all the banners and signs and everything were really terribly unattractive. And Mobile felt, if we could do a much more attractive and efficient station, maybe we could get into a lot of these communities and have an advantage over our competitors. So Warner looked to IBM and the program they had done, which was run by Elliot Noyes, the architect. He asked Elliot if he would work with Mobile, and Elliot in turn recommended us to do the graphics on this thing, and that was the start of it. And we worked very much together at the beginning to conceive how this could be done in a very different way. And this slide is actually what we presented to Mobile management of the program. This was the first they saw of it. There were no alternates. This was it. It has the canopies around, and this was before self-service was around much, but we could see it coming, so to protect people. And the whole theme of roundness, there's a round little office there in the middle, there are round cabinets, and so on, was very much a part of it. So the O and the red O was part of that whole idea at the time. And it also gives distinction to an easily mispronounced word and otherwise very simple lettering. It was actually part of the whole alphabet we did at a time when it wasn't as easy to do alphabets as it is now. And this alphabet, which only came in this one weight, became an absolutely key component of this whole program. And it's the same letters that are used in the Mobile logo. So this was also what was presented in that initial presentation, the idea that you could have other words tied in, so like Mobile tires in the middle there and so on with it. And this is actually the first station that was done for the new design. This is in New Haven, Connecticut. And you could see the basic components there that were in that white model. The sign, the round pumps. This is the sign as it evolved. But basically, we took the horse, we took it off the sign and put it onto the buildings onto a white disc. And then we had color components. Here are some of the early round devices and the round pumps and so on. Now this went on for a number of years and evolved through packages and other kinds of things, and really terrific advertising. But all of these things use that mobile alphabet for the headlines. Even the small type there is in, and all the type on the packaging is this mobile alphabet. Doyle Dane Bernbach, you saw the, you might have seen before the Think Small ads. The same agency was doing mobiles ads, and they did this terrific campaign about We Want You to Live. Mobile was very progressive, especially for an oil company at the time. The alphabet was used even for little price labels and shops. They started the idea of op-ed ads. They were the first ones to do that. They felt it was important to express their opinions, even if you didn't agree with it, but that you knew where they stood on things. About 20 years later, the whole thing was updated in the sense that the stations, now self-service was there, so bigger canopies were needed. You have a vestige of the round things in the insets there, but the graphics have remained the same. They're very simple, but they remained the same over all these years. And minimum signs, but signs where they're needed, color where it makes a point, and only red and blue cars are allowed, of course, in mobile stations. And the horse, again, when the pumps changed, when you could get any grade at a pump, again, but everything about those pumps and everything, we in the noise office were involved in all of this. At the same time, over the years, we did over 100 posters for television shows and cultural events that Mobile sponsored. They were very big on that. This is a sculpture at their then headquarters in Fairfax, Virginia. And we also had the responsibility for buying, purchasing, and commissioning all the artwork in all their offices around the world. So it was a very big involvement, and one that was very fulfilling, actually, to us. Then Exxon took over, and we haven't been involved since then. The Library of Congress is something that we had involvement with for over a decade recently. This is one of the buildings, or actually two of them there. It's this fantastic building right across the street from the Capitol in Washington. And after having designed exhibits for many years, we heard that they were rethinking their whole identity. And a study had been done. This is some of the artwork, the ceiling, the dome in that building you just saw. This is one of the exhibits that we had done. This is Thomas Jefferson's original library, the books from that. But that they had realized that they have many parts to the library that in the US you would never realize. The US Copyright Office, the research end that does all the research for our Congress and so on. And they felt they needed to tie these back together. So just in the last 2 years, we did a large study for their identity. And Segi's going to talk about that.
So just, again, just as an opportunity to talk a little bit about elemental things, fundamental things about identity design. Mobile, in the case of mobile, such a short, sweet name, 4 letters, it was obvious that, we really wanted, to focus on a name like this to make it memorable, and it was done with the red O. In some cases where the name is longer, we choose to design a symbol. And this was one of these cases. And when we came into this, as Tom mentioned, a study was done. All these different logos existed for the library, for the different divisions and so on. And especially this this dome, basically designed after the dome of the building, the Jefferson Building, which we felt, it looks like a cover for a dinner plate a little bit, but also it doesn't really make much sense because it doesn't say anything about the library. So first we looked at the name and we realized that, that this was the type design for the name, and we realized that actually the is not really part of the official name. It's just Library of Congress. So we just dropped the, and in this way we could kind of justify the two lines to become one unit. We also chose to use the Typeface Trajan, which since then got really overused in movie posters and stuff like that, and we kind of felt sad about it, but it seemed very appropriate for the typeface that was inspired by the first alphabet on the base of the Trajan column for this largest library in the world. When it came to the symbol, we made a case to them that it really, I mean, this dome is sitting next to a much more fabulous, famous dome. So why focus on the dome in the mark? It just doesn't make any sense. And this dome for the Library of Congress used to be gilded. But then Congress passed a law that said that you could not have a more fabulous dome than the Capitol dome, and it had to be de-gilded. So why use the dome? So it didn't make sense, and we looked at many, many different possibilities, what to do with a symbol for this great institution. And one of the most obvious directions was the idea of light or torch, which is actually on the top of the dome, but just the idea of the light of knowledge. And these are pictures from the architecture of the Jefferson Building. So it's in there, and it just seemed to us like a very appropriate idea. But this is just the first page of a quick Google search for Torch logo, and I think it has 4,200,000 results. So Torch logos are everywhere, and it's very, we realize that it's going to be hard. And actually, the one on the top right there, I mean, middle right is the NYU Torch, which was done by Tom in 1960-something. So we said, okay, let's forget about the torch and let's look elsewhere. So for this National Library of the United States, ultimately, we came up with this idea to combine the idea of a book and the American flag. And it went through many, many iterations, different kind of sketches. How can we combine it in the simplest possible way? And we came up with this. It has the 13 stripes of the American flag, and it's a waving book. And then these are just slides taken from the actual presentation to them, because what we really show is how it works. I mean, many times we have to remind clients that a trademark is not about what one likes or dislikes. It's about what works. And the way we test what works is in applications. So this is showing some of the type treatments with it, and then going through different applications. This is the website, the way they had it. We didn't really touch the website design. We just showed them how it can be identified in a much bolder way, and using the architecture, the beautiful architecture of the Jefferson Building. So we took that idea of using the architecture, and to the left is an existing brochure, and to the right is a suggestion of how we can have an attitude of identifying the library in a consistent way on the top right, and using images of the architecture. So this is a collection of brochures from different divisions. They look like they have nothing to do with each other. And so we took that and we kind of applied a look that makes them look like a family, but each one still has its own kind of distinctive look. And it goes on and on. These are brochures for exhibitions that we happen to design also, but clearly identifying the library. And then when you have a bold, simple symbol like this, you can use it in different materials. This is blind embossing, stamped in a book bag. And they have a large store with souvenirs. So the possibilities are endless. And obviously, it can be reduced to 50 by 50 pixels. very easily. So again, keeping these things simple really helps. Now remember what I said about Torch, and here's Ivan HarperCollins.
So more books and more paper, and the merger of Harper and Row with William Collins, which is, I think, was founded in the early part of the 19th century in London. They had a symbol of a torch at Harper and Row, and William Collins had this fountain, which was very elaborate and very hard to use, and the two didn't melt together very well. But out of that came the idea of putting fire and water together as one symbol. And it's one of the few very illustrative symbols that we've done. We've done a few, but not too many out of the hundreds. And because we needed something that worked in black and white, worked in color, worked in very small spaces on the spines of books, and made very elaborate guidelines, made, as you can see on that open page, we put Harper and Collins together as one word without spacing, and made it so that it could work in red and blue, in gold and in silver stamping, and Harper and Collins on 2 lines or 1, and it has worked out extremely well and is quite memorable in a very competitive environment of the average bookstore. So finally, the chase.
Well, just 2 more, and we know you've all been sitting for a long time, and just a couple minutes more. Chase is a special meaning for us because it was really the first major thing we ever did. I'm not sure how. We were only teenagers at the time we got to do it, but what it was actually was that 2 major banks had merged, the Chase National Bank and the Bank of the Manhattan Company. Bank of the Manhattan Company, I'm sure none of you have heard of it, but actually is a very old U.S. bank. It goes back to revolutionary times and was quite a large bank, actually. And so they somehow took the Chase National Bank mark and had made this out of it. And they were trying to say, well, we're not just U.S., so we're also the world and worldwide banking and so on. At the same time, they were building this very modern skyscraper in Wall Street. It was the first modern skyscraper in the Wall Street area at that time. So they wanted to have a new or updated identity to go along with the opening of this building, which was to be their headquarters and so on. And we thought about what can you do for a bank? You know, I mean, there really is nothing that symbolizes bank. It may be a dollar sign or something, but most banks use their initials or something else because there's really not much to go on. And had the idea, could we use an abstract mark for a bank? And we had picked these out and as ones that they would recognize on the American landscape. There weren't many. I believe the one in the upper right is Alcoa at the time. I was trying to think when I saw it the other day. But it was an idea because the bank had so much exposure that they were a very big bank at the time. I think they were the 2nd biggest in the country, the merged bank. And that they could establish something as the symbol of the bank, and especially because they had this long name, Chase Manhattan Bank, it's a lot of words. They realized that someday they'd probably drop Manhattan, but they didn't know when. It took, I think, 17 years actually to do it. So the idea of a symbol seemed to make sense, and we showed them a number of abstract designs. Ended up with this one, which was in that first group because it had a sense of motion and it sort of suggested Chinese coins and some other things. There was a triumvirate that we presented it to, the chairman, the president, and the vice chairman, who was David Rockefeller, who had been sort of given coming from a art collector point of view, been given being in charge of the building and this program. The chairman hated this. The president said, well, why can't it just be a picture of the building? And they said, well, it's just going to be a rectangle, or one of the sculptures, which was a Giacometti and, or a Dubuffet and so on. I mean, explained that that wouldn't work. The chairman said, okay, I'll go along with it, but I don't want to see it on my letterhead. I don't want to see it in my office. I don't want to see it anywhere that I'm part of. And I think it was 6 months later, we ran into him in the hallways. He had a pin with the logo on it. He had a tie made out of the pattern of the logo and so on, because it was a great lesson for us that these things can't be separated from the institution they represent. And after a while, you don't look at it as just a design, you look at it as representing that institution. And that obviously happened to him. It was no longer just a design, it was the bank, and he was proud of the bank. So we did many things, including, again, doing an alphabet, which again was not easy, sort of based on some 19th century ones. We basically made this very elongated lettering. This is in the lobby of the headquarters there. And because we realized that almost all these banks, you would approach it at an angle, and it made it easier to read if the lettering was elongated. And there were just many of these suburban ones as well as city banks and so on. And we tried to do something that was quite elegant, simple, and that seemed to go along with what they wanted to do. The lettering, was used in nice materials, on nice materials, and so on. This was in one of their major offices where simply the forms of the sculpture of the logo make the image. And we did many graphics, again, trying to be elegant, clean, and so on. Now, subsequently, Chase has had many owners. Chase has gone through many hands. The one thing that's been consistent is the name Chase and the logo. Today, it's owned by JP Morgan. This is something from the 80s when Chemical Bank took it over, and they took the lettering and just moved it up. And this is a shot I took the other night on 3rd Avenue in New York. I counted 12 major signs on this one small branch. It is so overdone these days that it's quite amazing. I mean, the symbol is even in that blue pattern that the symbol is on those things. We're not sure why, except some sign company really made out with this. But still, basically, the symbol is that, and it's now become, just in the last couple of weeks, the largest bank in the country, and certainly very recognizable. So this is, a thing about an abstract mark, which at that time was very unusual. Subsequent to that, there became thousands of them. And we even made a study for something else of ones that look like the Chase mark that are other banks in the country. So it's much more difficult today. So Sagi is going to end here with one where we faced that situation.
So that challenge of selling an abstract mark in 1960, we still face these challenges today. And this is a very recent project that we dealt with a similar situation with Conservation International is a leading environmental organization. They have a battery of scientists, and they try to figure out how they can help the environment. This is the mark that they've had since they were established. I mean, when we looked at it at first, we were horrified, but that's not the reason they wanted to change it. They loved this mark. Every single one of the 1,111 employees of this organization loved this mark. They loved it so much that actually the president of Conservation International is a primatologist, and he hand drew this monkey that's hanging from the tree. So there was a lot of attachment to this mark. But what happened was that, and please remember this monkey, because later on I'm going to show you something. So they have gone through a transformation in recent years and realized that focusing on an environment for the environment's sake was not really working, and that they needed to shift from protecting hotspots around the world, which they've been very successful with, from focusing on biodiversity for biodiversity's sake to focusing on issues that have to do with humans, fresh water, food, and so on, and really even focusing on cities. So that's, considering that shift, that patch of grass that looks a little bit like Club Med but has no people in it, didn't really make sense. So at first they were like, oh, should we add a person in there? Okay. But then, so they came to us, and for that reason, that it didn't really jive anymore with their mission, their new mission statement. And so we looked at different nonprofits and environmental organizations, how they represent themselves. And we looked especially at organizations that have a human figure, because that was their initial desire. Let's do something with a human figure. But very quickly, we realized that this is really impossible to do something with a human figure that's going to be really distinctive, and they have to be represented as a leader. So we explored a lot of different ideas, and this is just one iota of what we explored. And ultimately, we ended up with something very, very, very simple, which we felt very strongly about, which is a blue circle representing a blue planet, underlined, emphasized in green. And for us as designers, we were very excited about it. But that wasn't very easy to bring up and try to sell with these guys that were used to a pretty painting and that everybody loved. And emotional attachment is something that you really can't argue with. I mean, there's no negotiations there. They loved it, and that's what they were looking forward to seeing something new. So we showed it as usual. We showed it in applications. We thought, okay, a logo is not what someone likes or dislikes. It's about what works. So let us show you how well it works. It works in small size. The old logo didn't work in small size. On a business card, it works on, we can make a whole system. They have representation in every single country. Here is a beautiful system that it can work in. Obviously on the website, even as a fave icon in the little browser, it works perfectly. Don't you see? No. This is the founder, Peter Seligmann. He does a lot of fundraising. He's a very respected figure. They work with governments and embassies all around the world. It was very important that it would look great behind him, behind the podium. It looks great. They're even on every Starbucks cup. Works great in one color. Works as an artwork on a T-shirt. We weren't getting anywhere, and it's been months, and it was very difficult. We then went a step further and created these brand posters. And usually we would say, never put a picture in a logo. But this mark was so simple, then we realized that it's possible. And it can embody the brand and embody the relationship between nature and humans, which was their new mission statement, so why not? Look how great it looks. No. So eventually, we did something that actually Tom and Ivan didn't have back in 1960 to help them sell the Chase logo. We did a short animation that helped kind of imbue meaning into that abstract mark and explain that this is actually an expansion of some, forgive me while I move to a different application. And this short film that we did helped us with this. So here's sold. That was good.